I do want to cue into a video from Pastor just to hear the heart of what's happening this year, Easter 23 at Evangel Church. Check this out.
Hey, church family, I want to give you an opportunity to do something amazing. We've been doing a series on legacy, and I want to give you an opportunity to create a legacy on Easter Sunday. You say, well, how do I do that? Well, last year we were packed and we didn't have room for people to sit. So we're asking you to partner with us in sit one, serve one. You go, what does that mean? Well, sit in one service, serve in another. We're having two services that Sunday. That's right, two. We have to. There was no room for our kids and there was no room for anyone else in here. So at 9 o'clock, if you want to come to church with your family, you can sit in that service and be a part of a great time as we talk about Legacy Lives. Then what you can do is you can serve the next service, 11 o'clock. Serve for some of our kids so that the ones that are working can come and be in service and enjoy it with their family. So Easter Sunday, it's sit and serve. Sit one service, serve another. Serve one service, sit the other. You figure out how you want to do it. We just need you to come and be part of a legacy that we leave for our community. Look forward to seeing you Easter Sunday. And don't forget, QR code's going to come up. You can see someone at the tent outside, but it's Sit and Serve Sunday on Easter. Look forward to seeing you.
Give it up for our lead pastor, Pastor Levon. Such an awesome guy.
I miss him.
Sit one, serve one. Yeah, it was very interesting this past half week with him being out. It was very interesting. Pastor Stephen and I hid for a long time. We didn't hide at all. We're just kidding. We were playing Nerf gun wars in the office. We're just kidding, Pastor. That was a joke. We weren't doing that at all. But we are excited to share this morning. This is dangerous for Pastor Stephen and I.
Oh, yeah.
To share the stage. I think it's the first time we've actually shared the stage here at Evangel together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we're excited to do that this morning, to talk about legacy. When we began to hear the vision of legacy, and we got to sit around the round table and kind of talk about what does legacy mean. It is challenged by actually last year at Grow Conference is where the first time this really kind of began to probe our heart, and from there just be kind of stewed and stirred and simmered, and we just began to have conversation about it, so eventually it boiled over. And we begin to say, you know what, how can we take a word like legacy and take the context of leaving a legacy and turning it into how we live now. It affects our life and our community now. The decisions that we make, the choices, and all of that stuff now can begin to make a difference in the legacy that we're living. And we've come up with all of these different things of legacy being things that are challenging us, that is cultivating community, is cultivating family, and really kind of taking time to think about how we can live a legacy. And Pastor Stephen and I are thrilled today to share legacy isn't lineage. It's not just lineage. It's not just for you and your house. And we want to take the next, like hour and a half, 2 hours to just share our heart in that and what that means. No, we won't hold you that long, but we would love to share our heart. Pastor Stephen, would you share what legacy really means to you?
Absolutely. Well, I'm a bit of a word guy, so I want to start with the definition of legacy because I do think it's falsely interpreted sometimes. So the definition of legacy is the long-lasting impact of particular events, actions, etc., that took place in the past or of a person's life. You see, many times legacy is falsely related to lineage or bloodline or your kids and their kids and so forth. When we emphasize the importance of living a legacy, we're not talking about your children and their children. We're talking about the next generation, period. You've heard that phrase a lot recently in the past couple of years, right? Next gen, next generation. That's kind of the whole ministry branding of it. But it's true. The next generation is coming up, and I think it's such an umbrella statement to basically mean, the students of today, whatever that means. Right. Because not too long ago, we were the next generation. There's a little bit of a gap between us, but that's not important. But we're not just referring to your kids and their kids, but I will say both Jake and I were privileged to see this principle modeled in our family, in our parents and in our grandparents. We saw that principle modeled there, and now we are able to live that in our lives as we've dedicated our entire career paths to kids who aren't our children. And they're not our children, they're not our blood, but that's kind of our ministry now. and it's really where it comes from. Well, here's kind of my backstory when it comes to how I see this principle modeled. When I was 2 years old, my family packed up and moved from Alabama to Crawfordville, Florida, where my dad took the position as a youth pastor for the first time, and he was going to be a youth pastor, and my mom was going to be a teacher. So that's already pretty cool. They both have jobs that are centered around the students of today, or I guess that day, back then, and pouring into their lives, educating them just in very different ways. Well, now here we are 20 years later, and now they both work as the network youth directors for the West Florida district. Yeah. And so now they work as pastors to youth pastors, and it's their job to equip youth pastors as well as students through events like Kids Camp and many of the events that we see going through, and many of the resources released in the district come from them. So 20 years later, and their passion for the students of today is still on full display. It's still their livelihood. It's still their career path. It's still what they push and what they model. Earlier I mentioned grandparents. My grandparents have supported our Next Gen programs, and they don't even come here. They don't attend here. They've only ever watched online. I'm sure they're watching right now. Hey, Nana and Grampy and Mimi, I love you all. But they still, just purely through us and through the love of our students, they've scholarshiped some of our students to go to camp and towards our BGMC projects. Why? Because that's kind of, again, legacy isn't about lineage, but I do believe this particular principle is in our blood. Something about going after the next generation, period, not just our next generation. The fundamental belief in the next generation has led to both myself and both of my sisters involved in kids ministry. Both me and my sister Emily, who you guys know, are both full-time in kids ministry. It's our bread and butter. It's what we do. It's what we love. And I believe that comes from the top. It comes from our parents, how we were raised. But to reinforce what I mentioned earlier, my family living their legacy is not to be viewed as vertical. That is not a vertical legacy.
That's good.
Right? Because at the end of the day, our lineage could stop, right? But the legacy would live on. How? Through the lives that have been impacted through the generosity of my grandma given towards a student coming to camp, through my parents dedicating their livelihood. That I know that their legacy will continue even if the lineage stops, because of the ministry and how God has used them to impact the lives of the next generation. So when we talk about how legacy isn't lineage, lineage could stop, legacy will live on if founded properly. Now, my favorite biblical example of this is the story of Samuel, and I've referenced this story in here before because I believe it's an example of a good kids pastor right here in Eli. Samuel was dedicated to God, so when he was old enough, he lived at the temple full-time, basically raised by Eli. It was Eli who demonstrated to Samuel how to hear the voice of God. Yeah. He heard his name being called a couple times. He goes to Eli. He's like, Eli, what's going on? Did you call me? Eli says, no. And then eventually he's like, wait a minute. Hey, that could be the voice of God. When you hear that again, I want you to respond. Yeah. Eli demonstrated to Samuel how to hear the voice of God. And Samuel does, and now we regard Samuel as one of the great prophets. Well, years later, Samuel is told by God, he's using that skill, he's using that talent that Eli enforced in him. He's told by God that he is going to be the one to anoint the next king of Israel among the sons of Jesse. He's going to go, he's going to find Jesse, he's going to look at his sons. By listening to the voice of God, again, a skill, a talent, a ability demonstrated by Eli, not his dad, by Eli, he used that, and through that skill, he was able to be like, no, not Eliab, not Abinadab and Abednego and all the Hebrew names. And he's like, no, none of them. He said, are there any more sons? Because I don't feel it. I don't feel like any of these guys are on the roster. And then Jesse said, we got one more, and then comes King David. That King David, the David we know as a man after God's own heart. From his bloodline, from his lineage, we get Jesus Christ. Now, again, Eli has no blood relation to Samuel. Samuel has no blood relation to David. But because Eli stepped in faith and lived his legacy,
that's good. Come on.
We now have what we know as everything. You know, that's really what it stemmed from, was from Eli living his legacy, not being after his own kids and not just focus. As a matter of fact, later in the story of Eli, we know that he didn't focus on his own lineage. He kind of lets his sons go a little crazy, and they're actually punished for it. Why? Because it's not about lineage. It's about legacy, and legacy is not refined to your bloodline. And so I do what I do, not because my dad did it, but because somewhere I get the opportunity someday, somehow, and maybe it's happened already, I might get the opportunity to speak to a Samuel, right? That's why I do what I do. I'm going to get the opportunity to speak life into a Samuel, into a David, into someone that God has said, man, this guy's done big things. And I believe every student I speak to, God has got something huge in store for them. That's why I do what I do. Because I'm going to get the ability to speak life into that one person. And I'm not talking the whole 9 yards, the full Jesus. It could be as simple as a Jesus loves you, I do too. It could be as simple as reaffirming God's love for them. But I believe that that is enough to continue the legacy that we've seen modeled by Eli, modeled by Samuel, and modeled by Jesus himself. So what we actually got to do, because of that, I really prioritize teaching kids prayer, and I want them to understand the importance of prayer, the importance of having their own prayer life, and to know that God should be their first response, their first talking buddy. When you want to talk gossip, check up with him first. And so a couple months ago, we did the Matthew 7:7 prayer experience. Matthew 7:7 tells us to keep asking, keep searching, keep knocking. It's a great verse about the persistent prayer that God wants from us, the persistent seeking of his presence. And at each station, the kids got to look into and they got to model what that looks like. They got to ask a question. They had a whole bunch of question starters: who, what, when, where, why. They drew one randomly, and their prayer started with that word. Who should I be looking out to pray for? Who should I be a better friend to? You know why? And so they start their prayer with that prayer starter, and now we're already teaching them how to pray differently. Not your everyday, God is great, God is good. We want them to pray like they speak, and we want them to seek after God like they seek after answers in real life, because they do. Every day they seek for truth. Every day. On their phones, with their friends, they seek for truth. Do they find it? No. Probably not on TikTok, and probably not on their friend Ethan's mouth. Like they're not. That's not where they're going to find truth. But they're going to look for it, and so we want them to start their prayers with the same way they look for that. We did keep asking, keep seeking. They seek through a pile of different attributes and fruits of the Spirit that God's given us: patience, forgiveness, peace, stuff like that. And they sought through the pile. They prayed about it. They sought through the pile, and they found something that would help them in their situation. So they found forgiveness, because, man, they really need to forgive their brother for what they've been holding over their head for the past couple weeks. They saw grace, because, man, they've been giving their teacher a hard time. So they sought the solution for their problem in another prayer starter. And then finally, keep knocking. One of my favorite, and we got to take sticky notes. They wrote their problems on a sticky note. They simply put it on the door. They knocked on it, because when you knock on a door, what happens? The owner comes out, right? You invite them out. That's what you're doing. So they knock on the door, and they're inviting God into their situations and into their problems, because that's what we do with our prayer. We keep asking, we keep seeking, we keep knocking. So I do my job, and I do stuff like this because at the end of the day, I'm not the end of it. Life will go on after me. There's going to be a lot of stuff happening. Like, I am not the end-all, be-all. I know that it's going to come down to the next generation having a strong foundation of prayer, of communication, and that's why I do what I do. That's why I love legacy beyond lineage.
Anybody else want to go to EC Kids services? Like, man, that's fantastic. It might be because I'm simple, but I love tactile messages. I love I can touch it. I love that part of it. I have to be honest, when we first started talking about legacy, probably like many of you, the first thing that I thought about was family. The first thing I thought about was about my family and about my heritage and about where I come from. I shared a couple of weeks ago in a transition. I don't know why I felt prompted to share, but in a transition out of worship into announcements, I shared about my grandparents, how just 6 months ago I ended up losing both of them within a 4-month span. And it was very difficult for me. I'd lost my other set of grandparents in 8th grade and then my senior year, right before I left for Bible college. But this particular set of grandparents had a spiritual heritage that my sister and I now get the privilege to carry the torch for now. And I mentioned that in their 50s, as poor Hispanics in South San Antonio, they decided to go to night Bible classes because once devout Catholics, I mean, they wouldn't even eat deviled eggs. That's how devout Catholics, no dirt devils, no devil cookies, no deviled eggs, because it had the name devil in it, okay? That devout Catholic, they went to a revival service in an evangelical church and found a relationship, not just religion, they found a relationship with Christ and said there has to be something more. And they started going to night classes in their 50s to get their ministerial degree. And they opened a church, and it was a lot of our family and their friends of the community, and they started a church in their 50s. And I remember growing up, going to our grandparents' church and getting to experience our family. My mom has 5 brothers and sisters, so just our family was a pretty large church. But just to go and experience that, I began to understand, okay, this is foundational for us. This is fundamental for us. And just to see that passed on from generation to generation was incredible. From then on, all of the visits that we went to, all the visits that we had with our grandparents always ended about my sister and I's spiritual journey. They'd ask, how's your walk with God? How's your relationship with Christ? And they would share, and they had these really, really old and very used Bibles that they would open up, and we would share scriptures and what God's doing in our life. And my grandma, who was like 4'9", right, just the cutest human you've ever seen in your life. You could put her in your pocket and take her wherever you want to go. She loved Goodwill. I don't know what it was. It was like treasure hunting for her. She just loved Goodwill. And she would share about going to GWs and sharing Christ with somebody in GWs. She's like, yeah, I just was talking to this lady about these dishes, and they had a cross on it, and I was like, you know what a cross means? And then I just got to share my testimony in Goodwill to this lady, and then she came to church the next Sunday. It was amazing. So that's the heritage that we come from. That's the lineage that precedes us, and that relationship led to a foundational and a fundamental truth in our life that our spiritual journey and our faith was a priority to us. And then we got the privilege to see it modeled in our own family, in the family with my mom and my dad. And it was amazing because our house was always ready for other people. Our door was always open. It sounds very cliche, but there would be many a times where either Ashley and I would bring a friend over who was in need, or we would come home and there's a whole family in our living room, and our parents are just sharing faith with them and sharing stories with them and encouraging them. And that's what we grew up with. We had a sibling set come and live with us for like 6 to 8 months because their family was going through just a horrific divorce, an abusive situation, and they got to live with us and experience what it was to be like a family and do devotions together and spend time together. And that's just what we got to see modeled. I had a buddy of mine when I was a junior. He was a sophomore. He was 16 years old. He played football. He was an amazing football player. But after football practice, he would go work all the way until 11 o'clock, come home, and then go back. So he started staying at our house. He lived at my house for almost a year. He had his own section in the closet. He had his own 3 drawers in our house. And he knew that he could come stay with us because it was closer to get to school the next morning. And now he's a physical therapist for a sports medicine team. And he still has a foundation, a fundamental belief in Christ. And he believes what he's doing is a calling to help other people who are in need. Because why? He saw legacy lived out in front of him. They weren't our kids. They weren't our bloodline. They weren't our family. They weren't our cousins. But it was legacy reaching far beyond lineage. It was legacy going, you know what? This isn't just for me and mine. This is for we and ours. This is about us. This is about community. And we got to see that modeled and echoed in our life. And it began to set a path for us, and a trajectory in our life that began to look at people more than just what we could potentially get out of them. But you begin to look at people and what can I invest? What can I deposit? Not what can I withdraw? What can I deposit into somebody? Somebody else might benefit from it someday. Somebody else might see the harvest from it one day. But what am I doing? I'm making a deposit into somebody's life that ultimately somebody else might experience, and then other people could come to a saving knowledge of Christ because of a small deposit that you make. That's legacy. That's beyond just lineage. We see this echoed through Scripture. We see it echoed through the life of Christ. And I believe in John 3:16. Many of us know it. Many of us quote it. Many of us make our kids know it. It's for God so loved the what? The world. That word there, kroamos, I think if I can speak that language very well, which I can't. It's all. I mean, the word means all-encompassing. It's not these people, those people, this select, those select. It's all-encompassing. For God so loved humanity that he gave. Because of his love, sacrificially, he gave something. And now we are the beneficiaries of that gift. And who are we to withhold it just for us? Just for me and mine? Okay, well, my house is taken care of. Like, we're all good. No, legacy is far beyond that. I want to share something really cool that's been happening in our ECU program. I told the students, as many of you know, I love doing surveys with them. Why? Because I want to give them a voice. I want them to know that they always have a voice. But secondly, I want to know what they're thinking. And if any of you know or have a teenager or someone close to a teenager and you're asking them any question, if you get 4 words, you're a winner. You might as well draw for lottery the next day. It's like pulling teeth to get information, to get knowledge. But I want to provide them with a place where they feel like they can be heard. Because oftentimes we pacify them. Oftentimes we hush them, and they don't feel like they can share and express themselves. So I give them that place to do that, and sometimes it makes me nervous what they say. But I want to share, and I did a survey, and one of the questions was this. It said, where is it at? Why did I lose it? Here we go. When I asked the students in a survey, what does a place like EC Youth mean to you? And we have about 100 students on our roster that come through on a monthly basis. Some might come once a month, some might come twice a month, but we have about 100 students that come through our door a month. And I got to ask these students this question, and here was the answers that we saw. Home. Over 20 of them said home. Family. Over 15 of them said family. Safe place. Over 20 students said a safe place. Love was a big one. Faith was a big one. This was a cool one, mine. A big part of my heart. Right? You're just like, yeah, that's you, kid. A place to be real and vulnerable. Whew. I love this one. I drive 30 minutes to service each week because I love EC Youth. Man. And here's the crux. Here's why we do what we do. The place where I started my faith journey. That's massive. And the last 3 I know specifically are not students of any parents in this room. They're parents in our community, but they don't come to church. Their family doesn't come to church. And they're the ones that said a place to feel real or to be real and vulnerable. They're the ones that said, I drive 30 minutes 2 towns over to come to a church. They're the ones that said, this is the place, these grounds, that gym is where I started my faith journey. I have a story of a student. He's a sophomore, and I don't know if many of you may have known, I'm the character coach with the athletic department at Mariana High School. I get to go to I was at the weightlifting meet on Friday, screaming at kids, "You got this!" Right? Just awesome. It was a fun thing to do. But I travel with the football team. I love football. It's just an easy way in, and it's only once a week. Amen. Baseball plays 75 times in 1 week. I don't know how you do it. I just don't know. Like, I don't know how you do that. But I got to travel the last 3 years with the football team. And I told Pastor Stephen this when I first started. I said, I'm not going to invite students to services until God releases me to do that. And to this day, 3 years later, serving as a character coach for 2 of them, I have never invited a student to a service. I have not. I go there. I love on them. I encourage them. I want to model. I want to exemplify what it means to be a man of God in the community. That's why I go. Begin to build relationship. I got to begin to build bridges. For the last couple of years, I've gotten to know a student. And without inviting him, other people invite him, and I'm welcoming that. And the other students come, hey, why don't you go to church? I'm like, yeah, tell him, whatever. He came on a Wednesday night, him and he brought a buddy with him. And he came to service, and that night I just felt like, most of the time we go to we go to a small groups, and the students have discussions based off of what we talked about. And sometimes we go to like an altar call after that where it allows the kids to respond based off of they feel like, hey, this is something I want to either talk to God about or get some prayer for. And that particular night, I was like, man, it's just something's heavy in the room. Like I just need to open this space up for anybody who wants to come and just talk to God, come reflect, come lay down whatever they're carrying. And this particular student just began to uncontrollably sob, like uncontrollable. And if you know anything about 16-year-old boys, that's not normally a character trait or emotional trait that they exemplify. And it was really cool to watch a couple of students kind of gather around him. And before anybody ever prayed for him, a couple of students gathered around and put their arm around him and just began to pray for them themselves. It was amazing to watch. And after service, I said, hey, man, do you want to talk? And he came up to me and just hugged me. And my T-shirt's soaking wet. And he's just still continuing to cry. And I was like, hey, do you want to talk? And he's like, yeah. So we go outside, and we began to talk. And I was like, hey, man, just what's going on? Are you okay? Or are you safe? Right? Just want to know why this young man's crying. And he said, man, I really needed to be here tonight. He said, I left my home because my parents were just screaming at each other. So I didn't feel safe in my own house. It was just a terrible home situation. And I had to get out. I called a buddy of mine and said, hey, man, can you get us a ride to church? So I know that youth pastor, we're going to go out there. My other buddies have been inviting me to come, but I just want to go and just kind of get out of this place. He said, from the moment I walked in these doors, I felt safe. I felt welcomed. I felt invited. I felt like I had a place to be here. We began to share more things about his family and share that. And he's wanting to make strides in his faith journey, and just didn't know how to do that and how to incorporate that into his life and his home situation. And from there on, this was almost 3 months ago, I think he's only missed 2 services because of ball games. He's now a committed person to come and to come be a part of what's happening at EC Youth. That's not my kid. And it's not even one of yours. That's living a legacy beyond lineage. Why? Because what do? We do a massive disservice if we just say it's for us and ours. I have to stand up. Stephen, I'm sorry. I've sat down long enough. We promise. I'm speaking for him at this moment. He's nervous. We promise to love your kids. We promise that.
That's right.
We try to do that day in and day out. Are we perfect at it? Absolutely not. Just like I'm sure you're not perfect at it day in and day out. Give us grace and we'll give you grace. Amen. We promise to love your kids. We come and we go to your kids' games, and we'll go to this, that, and the other, and we'll stay later. We'll have practices with them. We'll do that. We love them. But we also have another promise. It's to reach the ones that aren't in this room. To reach the ones that aren't in our services. It's to reach the ones that don't ever darken the door of our church. Pastor Stephen, for over 2 seasons, has been a soccer coach. In all his glory and athletic ability.
Just look at it. Soak it in.
He goes in his evenings to go, and those are none of his kids.
No.
None of his kids. And we had an opportunity to coach together last year, coach the football team together, which was a comedy show in and of itself. In and of itself. But it's strictly, the only reason we do that is to love on kids of our community. Multiple have come through this church. I actually got to see 2 of the dads in Chattahoochee the other week, and they were like, please tell me you guys are coaching again. They're like, what? We didn't win a single game, and you want us to coach your kid again?
Why would you put your kids through this?
Why would you do that again, like voluntarily? And they're like, our kids just loved the way that you coached them, and they just felt so loved and welcomed to do that. And it's because it's about depositing. It's about, I was talking with Robert before, so it's about scattering seed. And we have to be selfless enough to know we may never harvest that seed.
That's right.
They may never come to this church. But guess what? If they go to another church and somebody else continues to water that seed, and it begins to blossom, and they go out and be a Samuel, and they go out and make disciples, and they go out and change the world for the community, what has that done? A win for the community, a win for this church, and a win for the kingdom.
So good.
That's legacy. That's beyond lineage. That's living a life saying, you know what, I'm going to value other people as well. Yes, we'll love your kids. We love your kids. But we have two promises, to love yours and love theirs. And we cannot say that, hey, I'm sorry. Like that's something that we won't forfeit. We'll go do that, and we'll go be out, and we'll go do those things. Why? Because we are wanting to leave a legacy and live a legacy far beyond just lineage here. And it means a lot to us. Wow, sorry, that was me standing up. I was trying to sit down the whole time. It may not happen. I may have to get up again. But I'm surprised that went that long. I did pretty good.
He doesn't make it that long at staff meeting. There's times where he just starts standing up and walking laps. So he made it farther than he normally does.
That's progress. It's real growth. I'm in a small group for that. Pastor's like, why did I do this? Why did I do this? One thing that we hear often, what do you guys need, or what's going on, or this, that, and the other. You've heard 2 updates, and we've got to share some cool stories. But I think there's 3 things that if you were to ask Stephen and I what we need for our ministries, these are what they would be. We're going to kind of tag team this, so we might kind of go back and forth. Stephen might actually stand up. It's going to be intense. But if you were to ask us the 3 things that we need for our ministry, what you could do as a church body to support our ministry, this is what we would say. Number 1, live it. Live it. In your home, in your family, in your community, live it. That would help us a bunch to exemplify that, to model that, whether you have kids or whether you don't.
That's right.
Loving on people, finding a way to be sacrificial. In Philippians chapter 1, verse 27, it says, above all, you must live as citizens of heaven, conducting yourself in a manner worthy of the good news about Christ. You can't live what you don't know. You have to learn it to live it.
That's good.
You got to learn it to live it. So be a student of the Word.
That's good.
Be a student of the Word. If you're not in a part of a small group, be in a small group. I can remember the times that I started opening the Bible for myself, right? I started almost like getting a fork and feeding myself. I remember the moments I was like, oh, snap, that's really good. That ties into this story, or that's why the writer of Luke said like that. That's why he said that. Began to open things in my life, but you have to learn it in order to live it. So be a student of it. Model that. Exemplify that in your life and in your community and where you go into your spaces. The world that you're in, live that. And it'll be amazing what happens when you begin to live it and model it in your own home.
That's exactly right. I mean, when we start living our legacy instead of trying to sell it like an ad campaign, I'm telling you things are going to happen. Because kids today are sold everything all the time.
Yep.
Every app on their phone, every club at school is constantly trying to sell them something and hoping that they're bought in.
So
now, when the church makes a distinction and says, no, we're done selling, let's live it, and let's model it, and let's show it, now what are we seeing? Now what are we investing? And like you mentioned earlier, we may never see that seed fully bloom, but listen, they're going to think back. And I can tell you this now as someone who can think back to that kids pastor I had when I was 7 years old. Yeah. And I saw a person full of joy, and they came in on a Sunday morning. They worked 2 jobs, and they were screaming and having fun and dancing. Are you kidding me? Because they were living something that I didn't understand yet.
That's good.
But I grew to, and I grew to love that. I grew to value that. And I said, I want to be that. They didn't sell it to me. They actually advised me against it. They were like, hold on a second, are you sure this is where you want to go?
If you could do anything else for ministry and feel satisfied, please do it.
And that's the thing, but they lived it, and that's what caught for me.
Yeah.
That's what sparked. It wasn't being sold on anything. It wasn't, hey, this will get you this. You'll get this out of this. It's something about living sets the church as the distinction from the culture and from the world. When we look at what it means to be in the world, but not of the world. In the world, in the community, in our students' lives, but not of them. because you'll hear people talk about culture all the time like it's a cancer, and yes, there are absolutely fundamental problems with culture, but that's why we tell you to create the distinction, to live our life and not sell it. That's how we differentiate our states. That's how we say, no, we are not of the world. We're in it. We're here. We're here for you. We're here for your students. Yeah. But we don't partake in that. Right. And so I think that's the distinction we have to make as the church. It starts with living it. It really does.
And luckily, we had a great example of this. Galatians chapter 2, verse 20. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live. But Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. The life we now live is all because of the life of Jesus that he loved and he gave. All we are is image bearers. All we are is following an example of Jesus. The life we now live doesn't say now the life that we turn on Sunday morning.
That's right.
Or Wednesday night, or when I need it to be. The life that we now live. I'm not saying people aren't going to make mistakes. We're not going to have tempers. We're not going to have emotions. I'm not saying that. Nobody's free of that. But it also twofold that comes in and saying, admitting and acknowledging when you did blow it. That's living it as well. Saying, hey, I might have blown that. Forgive me. I want to grow. I want to be better. That's the life that we now live in the Son of God who loved us and gave himself for it. That's the example that we can follow. Number two, if you could ask us, this would be the second thing that we said that you could help us with. Serve it. Live it.
Live it, serve it. I can't stress this enough. How are you going to impact that next generation if you never see them? And I'm not talking about getting on stage doing puppets. Like that's not what I'm always talking about. Yeah. To be in their space and to love on them is enough. I'd say the two strongest ministry tools EC has kids going for them is in the check-in desk. And their names are Jay James and Mr. Edenfield. And that's probably two of our strongest ministry tools. Yeah. Because when kids walk in, they see two big smiles. They see two people willing to walk them into their class. They see two people who are willing to model and live it, as well as give their time every Sunday to serve it. And those are two of our biggest, like, when I'm talking about ministry wins, I rarely do I bring up numbers. I want to bring up how we've got someone like a Miss J. James, someone like a Miss Karen Watson, a Stephanie Jordan, who are serving it on a very, very frequent basis at the expense of their own physical and mental health. They're there. And I mean, people like Sherry Toole, and it's been cool to see my wife, Caitlin, step into this, because she apparently, before we got married, before we started dating, she said, no, kids ministry that's not it. That's not for me. And here we are. And she's with the kiddos right now leading lessons. So, I mean, you don't never say never. You know what I'm saying? So when it comes to serving it, I'm not talking about running puppets. I'm not talking about running skits. Now, as a creative and as creatives, you might find that's more fun than you realize, and there's actually some fun to it, and you can have fun with serving. But at the end of the day, we just ask that you come into our space and make yourself known as a presence. Yeah. Because that action right there speaks volumes to kids who don't see that anywhere else. They're so used to, again, and I want to use this a lot, I sound like my dad, in today's culture, seeing people unhappy with their jobs. Mm-hmm. Imagine what happens when they see volunteers happy to be there. Yeah. Unpaid people, like people actually happy to be there, and they're making the decision to work and serve them. They don't see that rarely anywhere else do they see that. And so imagine being that difference. And that's another distinction between us and the world, and to be in the world but not of the world.
Yeah. Well, Legacy has the interest of others in mind. Legacy has the very fundamental belief of Legacy is about other people. You see this in Philippians chapter 2, verse 3. It says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself. That sounds like sacrifice. Not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interest of others. That also sounds like sacrifice.
Sounds like to me.
In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. That sounds like sacrifice.
Sounds like sacrifice.
Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, Being made in human likeness and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even the death on the cross. Service and sacrifice go hand in hand. Why? Because serving is inconvenient. Can we just call it what it is? Serving is inconvenient. It's inconvenient to give of the time. It's inconvenient to come and to volunteer and to help or to show up early and to stay late. It's inconvenient to mask around with puppets for kids. It's inconvenient. It may be a little unconventional for you as well. But when you take on the mind of Christ, and when you say, you know what, if Jesus could do it, to come to this world, not to be served like a king, but to serve the king as a king, that's sacrifice and servanthood if I've ever seen it. That's modeling and exemplifying what it means to serve it, to serve the vision, to serve legacy. I have the privilege of having small group leaders, right? And they're going to each different small groups, and they're hanging out with the different age groups. I have middle school boys, middle school girls, high school boys, high school girls. And a couple of weeks ago, we had a very large number. Like in student ministries, it depends on whether there's a game or whether there's this, that, the other, if it's raining, like that. So you have like kind of ebbs and flows. So it's kind of hard to say. Every week we have this number because it just changes so much. But it was one of those weeks where like everybody decided to come at the same evening, and we're busting out the scenes, and we were supposed to go to small groups that night. And our smallest small group number was like 16 kids, and Noah's leading middle school boys, and there was 19 middle school boys from the ages or from grade 6th grade to 8th grade. 19 of them, after having some gummies and some juice, now supposed to sit down and talk about their faith. And Noah came up to me and he's like, Jake, never again. Never again. We've got to split up them chitlins. We got it. We just can't do that again. I don't even know what topics. I think Jesus was mentioned once or twice. We need to be able to split them. Well, in order to split them, we need the volunteers to be able to split them into those other groups. Serve it. We're asking you to come help us serve. We're asking you to come be a part of it. There is multiple places, even for Stephen's ministries. There's multiple places that you can serve. Now, listen, if you don't like kids, don't come talk to us, okay? Like that's probably not the ministry outlet for you. But if you do have a heart for kids, and you do want to make a difference, and you do want to see lives, and you can ask some of the small group leaders who are here, man, we have great conversations with these students. They get to hear and talk about and begin to dialogue about their faith rather than just being lectured about it. I want them to have a safe place where they can talk about it and to say, well, this doesn't really make sense, or, you know, that kind of challenges me in what I did this past weekend to be different, and to have those vulnerable places and those real places where the students can begin to dialogue about it. And that's important to me to have those. It's also important to me not to have so many in one group at a time. So again, it's about serving it. It's about legacy, not just, well, those aren't my kids. Well, they're not ours either. They're not the other volunteer leaders either. But it's about taking that mindset of legacy isn't just lineage. It serves the needs of others in mind. It keeps other people at the forefront. And quite frankly, while we're here, I love you. I really do. But we're all busy. We're all busy. We've all got a lot going on. Busyness doesn't equal progress. Busyness doesn't equal progress. We're all busy. It's time to be productive.
That's good.
You want to go into the third one?
We can hit it real quick. I do, and I actually have some news on that topic. So this third one, how to live your legacy and how to let your legacy go beyond lineage, is to give it. Is to give it. And when you see me up here, I'm typically talking numbers. I'm talking about BGMC projects, and I'm pushing them in some way. So I'm excited to kind of just explain the heart behind that and the biblical heart behind that. But I want to say that along with news that you guys just generously gave to, and keep in mind, this is spring break crowd. We're all chilling. Some of y'all are heading out right after this. I know we got a lot of friends.
Some of you wore swimming trunks to church right now.
That's exactly right.
It's 30 degrees. Never mind, you didn't do that. Yeah, it's a lie.
And so, and I know that, but you guys beyond that just gave $1,329 towards Project Rescue.
Wow. Give yourselves a hand. That's amazing.
Now, come on.
That's amazing. That is so cool.
I don't like, well, and I approach this knowing that I don't have kids. You know, other than this week, I've had 3. We were babysitting. I really got pushed into fatherhood. We were babysitting for our friends who are in a part of the Israel trip. And so Caitlin and I have, we got 3 kiddos now. So we went from no kiddos to 6, like 7 and 10. So that was fun. Woo!
Y'all should have seen Pastor Stephen the morning after he had to take them to school. If Pastor Stephen wakes up before 6:30, something important is happening. So for him to wake up and get the kids to school and to see him look like he just had the biggest allergy attack and his eyes are puffy and he's like walking in holding a big old pot of coffee.
I saw 2 of Jake that day. Just the whole time, I wasn't quite there all the way together. But it was a cool experience because I kind of got to practice what I preach a little bit because, it's one thing to talk about leading your kids. It's another thing to lead your kids. So I understand that, and I got to practice what I preach, so I was proud of how I handled that. But I am no parent, so I understand some of the sacrifice you make when it comes to finances, when it comes to priority. And so when we talk about this, we funnel it through a biblical sense. Because the Bible is infallible, it is the truth. So we funnel it. It's the same. The sacrifice they're asking is the same as it was thousands of years ago. So like I funnel it through a biblical sense because I don't want to talk from Stephen's sense because Stephen doesn't know. So speaking from a biblical sense, I'll say this first. What we see in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 9 is this: honor the Lord with your wealth and the first fruits of all your produce. First fruits. And I want to see it when we talk about. And when I talk about giving, and I know right now they're probably celebrating that we just hit $1,300, I want you to see giving not just as a chance to give towards these specific projects, but to model giving. It is beyond the action of giving. You are now modeling the spirit of giving. Those kids don't just see the number, they see the hands that gave it to them. They see the people who reached out. They see the people who were putting multiple dollars in multiple barrels. That's what they see. So when we give, we're talking beyond the action of giving. We're talking about the modeling, the representation of giving. We're talking about that principle and practice being taken and observed, and eventually we're going to see these kids doing the same thing. And I've been in different church environments, and I can say that you guys are an incredibly generous crowd. And I have every confidence, every Sunday at some point I reference how blessed we are to have the crowd we have. And so I know that, and I thank you guys for your sacrificial giving. And we just want to identify this as one of your ways of living your legacy beyond your lineage is to give. That money is not going to our kids. It's not going to me. It's going to Project Rescue. It's going to what they're doing and what they're pushing. And I'm telling you, it's incredible. Obviously, we had a lot of kids up here. So when I was talking about the project, I was having to use PG words. But in reality, kids in the community we were talking about are being sexually trafficked as young as 11 years old, 10, 11 years old. That's their life. The young girls are trafficked, and the boys are raised.
When we say it's their life, there's no other option.
There's just not.
There's no other option. 100% dropout rate by the 8th grade. 100%. If you're 13
for girls,
14-year-olds, if you're a female, 13 and 14-year-old in these villages, you are sold. And if you're not sold, you're prostituted in the same bedroom that you grew up in.
Mm-hmm. Your brothers are then raised to be the pimps, and that's their livelihood. That's what they do. They go straight up into it.
And the challenge is him passing the baton in one hand of ministry. So now that's like the lowest part of the age group bracket of where I begin to minister to, into that 11 to 14-year-old range. Just in that age range, there's over 35 young girls in this community that come to our church that are of that age group. And when we went to a conference and we heard this and we got to hear it presented to us, instantly I began to think, oh my gosh, those could be our girls. Those could be our kids. That they know no other lifestyle. And to them it's not even dirty, it's duty. It's not dirty, it's duty. It's like this is what I have. There's no other option. This is what I have to do.
Their mothers who were the victims of this continue to push it as well. It's just because it's lifestyle. It's what it is.
To them, that's legacy. To them, that's legacy.
That's their
And
legacy.
for us who carry a different type of legacy, it becomes our duty to make a difference. When we heard this project, Steve and I were like, do you want to tag team it together? Because there was a way that we could actually partner our ministries together to where his BGMC giving is going to the schools and ours is going to the safe house. And when I began to think about it last night, I was sitting here looking at the notes, and I had those pages, the stack of papers, and the kids that were writing what they loved about EC Youth and what EC Youth meant to them. And the amount of them that said safe place and home was over half. Over half of them. And then I began to think and correlate, okay, well, they're giving this year for Project Rescue, which we allocated $15,000 of giving each. $15,000 each for Project Rescue, half it to go to schools, $15,000 to go to schools, $15,000 to go to help build these safe houses for these girls. I began to think that is so crazy that our kids are benefiting from a safe place that feels like home. And their initiative that they're taking on this year is to help build safe places that feels like home for other people in need.
That's awesome. So cool.
That's legacy, not being lineage.
That's legacy.
And that's what we're asking you guys to help partner with us this year. So if you see ministries happening or other BGMC Sundays, or they come in and do that, please honor us with that. If you have the capacity to do that, awesome. If you don't, we understand. Giving is more than just of your treasure. There's time and talent as well. But the Bible is clear about giving. I'll skip over the second one and go to the last one. 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Just as you excel in everything, in faith and speech and knowledge and in complete earnestness in your love for us, see that you also excel in the grace of giving. Excel. He said first fruits earlier. Raise your hand if you love leftovers. You're a special kind of people, okay? Okay. Just being frank, God doesn't. God doesn't. He says first fruits. He says honor him with that. Why? Because I'll reference back to the second one now, Deuteronomy chapter 8. Remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives the ability to produce wealth. It's all from him, and it's all for him. We are giving out of that capacity from the provision that he's already given us.
And let me tell you, that principle is so foreign to students. The idea that what they have isn't really theirs, that instead we're giving, what? I've been told my whole life that what I get is mine, and I got to take control of mine, and I got to take care of mine, and I can spend mine on this, and I can spend mine on that. The mindset is infectious amongst our generation. And so when we ask you to give it, when we ask you to speak, and it sounds a little foreign, that's because it is in today's culture. It really is. But we ask you to be different. A separation from the world, a separation from culture. And it's by living that difference, by serving when it's not convenient, it's by giving when it doesn't make sense, that we define our legacy for the many, many generations to come. Not just our children, but beyond, for their friends and their community members. And that's what we want to see happen at Evangel. That's why we're pushing it, and that's why, if I'm being honest, you're going to hear the word legacy a lot more, because it's more than us. It's more than you. And let me tell you now, if you heard our testimonies at the beginning and that sounded foreign to you, because you can't imagine having parents and grandparents who they brought you up in that, I challenge you to let it start with you. Every legacy requires a start. Be that start. Be that beginning. That generous nature, maybe you grew up, your parents weren't good with money, they didn't model giving. Be the start. They didn't model serving. Be the beginning. And that's how we see big things happen through legacy. That's how we see big things happen through you guys.
And it's, again, giving is more than just the treasure of and the quantity of it. I recall a story in the Bible where God blessed and honored a lady that brought 2 rather than 10. It's out of the heart pot. God knows where you are. God understands that. And again, this is where we get asked this a lot. What can we do to help? Well, what do y'all need? That's what we need. We need you to live it, serve it, and give it. That's what we need. And much more than that, just smile and wave at us. That's pretty much it. Again, we have promised. I can speak probably for myself and for him, far beyond just our career. It's a calling. We're going to do it regardless. We're going to do it. We promise that. We love your kids. Love them. But we're also going to love on the ones that don't come here, the ones that don't have that privilege, ones that aren't maybe a part of that legacy and the lineage yet. They're going to get some love. They're going to get some love. And that's something that we are excited about. And that's something that we are earnestly seeking to make a difference in. And like you said, legacy is going to be a word that you hear a lot because it's a word that should mean a lot to us. It should mean a lot to us. To close, would you mind standing? Would you mind standing with us? I want to just pray us out. You've heard us talk for long enough. But we don't have the opportunity every Sunday to talk to you guys. So thank you for giving us the liberty to share our hearts with you guys and our vision. And if you want to know more about what we have, this is kind of the Spark Notes version for if you want to talk to Steve and I about some more legacy, like we would love to talk to you about it. But we just want to pray over you guys, over our students, and over our community and over the community kids, that God just begins to move beyond just a lineage and to challenge us to live that legacy for other people. Would you mind just stretching your hands out to heaven? Father, we love you. We thank you so much for your goodness and for your faithfulness. God, you are such a good God. You are such a good God. We are so privileged and honored to be a part of the family of God. Father, I pray that as we've been challenged today, God, to live it and serve it, to give it, God, that it not be a sense of overwhelming, God, but it be a sense of just challenging us to grow into who you're calling us to be. God, I pray that as we live it, we exemplify it and we show an example of what it means to be a man and a woman of God that loves in our community, that shares in our community, that gives in our community. God, help us live that in our own home. God, help us model and exemplify what it means to be a godly father, a godly mother, and a godly sister, and a godly brother. Help us model what that means to be in our own home and to let it be echoed out to our community. God, let us have the heart to serve. God, for the same way that you came to serve, you had every right to ask to be served, but you came to serve. God, let us exemplify that. Let us model that in our own life. God, we know it's inconvenient. We know it can be unconventional, God, but let us move beyond the own barriers and borders that we build up. And God, let us say, above all else, we are serving your kingdom. And God, to give of our time, talent, and our treasure. God, for your word says that where our treasure is, there our heart will be also. I pray that our heart is for your kingdom. God, that may all these things may pass away. All of these things, these earthly possessions, these earthly things or goals or desires may pass away. But imagine an investment to make into somebody else's life that shows up in heaven, that smiles at you and says, thank you so much for giving it. Thank you so much for modeling it. God, I pray for our students. God, just a hedge of protection over our kids. God, they are facing extremely unfavorable circumstances. Insurmountable odds are against them, God, but I pray that your peace, that your grace and your mercy go before them, God, that you're leading them and guiding them, Father, in paths of righteousness for your name's sake. God, above all else, I pray that we can be Eli's that begin to call on the Samuels, God, that can have the legacy and the lineage to call upon a David one day. God, let's begin to plant those seeds, to make those deposits and investments into other people. Help us, Father, to live a legacy that's way beyond just our lineage. Help this church to live a legacy way beyond just our lineage of Evangel Church. Help us pour out legacy into this community. We love you, and we thank you so much. We give you all the praise and all the glory. And everybody said, amen and amen.